I don't know about you, but my For You page has been dominated by discussions about the rise in popularity of extreme thinness, perpetuated partially by the current press tour for the second installment of the Wicked franchise. Many people have noted the extreme change in body fat percentages of the cast members, specifically Ariana Grande, Cynthia Erivo, and Michelle Yeoh, all of whom appeared on red carpets recently looking especially gaunt. This has sparked a larger conversation about how extreme thinness is actually reinforced and perpetuated by fascism, and that it is no coincidence that thin is once again in now that we have a fascist regime controlling the government. But is that true? Is there really a massive government conspiracy to keep women thin and hungry so that we can't fight back when the revolution comes? Commentary about bodies online tends to trend towards black and white thinking, and I think that is also happening here. It also tends to ignite a firestorm of back and forth, of debate, in a way that few other subjects online tend to do. I made one offhanded single-sentence comment in a video a couple weeks ago about how I don't like diet culture because I think there are better things to be doing than starving yourself, and y'all had more to say about that single line than about the entire rest of the video, and there's a lot to unpack there, which we'll get into. So I wanted to get to the bottom of this discussion and figure out correlation versus causation, cause and effect. Are we all getting more obsessed with thinness because of the fascist takeover in the White House? This headline from CNN caught my eye. Cynthia Erivo shields Ariana Grande from barrier jumping fan. It is this video that has helped to spark the discussions about thinness and fascism online. Using the Ground News browser extension, I can see that in the US, CNN is considered left-leaning. To get the big picture, I can click on full coverage, which will show me coverage of the same story from publications across the political spectrum. My partner on today's video, Ground News, uses 3 independent monitoring organizations to assess the bias rating for each publication. Each news monitoring organization has their own methodology, including editorial reviews, blind bias surveys, independent reviews, and third-party research.
What's the far-right culture and beauty publication that came to be as a way to like oppose the body positivity movement? No, it's called Evie. Yes. Yeah. Evie magazine. Evie magazine was essentially the alt-right's answer to Cosmopolitan and other magazines that were that were promoting the body positivity movement. Here it is. Here's an example. The era of pretending, I'm not going to fucking subscribe, obviously. The era of pretending women didn't want to be skinny is over. And this is not a like cultural piece that is analyzing how thinness was never out. And like, it's not a, you know, it's what it is saying, ha ha, see, we were right. There are multiple, there's an entire subgenre on this site that is dedicated to denouncing the body positivity movement and advocating for thinness and advocating for white supremacist standards. It's a very it's trad wifey. It's all about like traditional femininity.
These are legitimately independent organizations, but they are limited by the data available to them. Their analysis is done in the context.
Here's a quote. Here's a quote from a writer, Gina Florio. At some point, we have to ask ourselves whether we really want to promote healthy, realistic images to young women, or if we want to simply appease the progressive mob and their ever-changing standards of tolerance and acceptance. Florio is responsible for 5 out of 7 Evie articles and is the author of Fat and Unhappy, How Body Positivity is Killing Us.
of the US political system. Our Overton window has shifted so far right that CNN is considered left-leaning. That tells you a lot about the context within which the media you're consuming operates. And thanks to Ground News, I get even more context, including how factual each publication is and who owns it, giving me a well-rounded idea of the motivations, biases, and accuracy of the news I'm consuming. Wouldn't it be great if everyone in America had that much information about the news they consume? Because depending on where you or your family members get the news, you're going to get very different takes on the same story. This is where Ground News comes in and why I've been using them for over a year. Today's partner, Ground News, is an app and website
CNN
that
being
offers
called
tools to help you
left-leaning
critically
is very
analyze the
funny.
news you read, providing context to understand the full picture. I feel better equipped to make sense of what's happening in the world
CNN.
without being influenced by just one perspective. And I'm not the only one who loves Ground News. The Nobel Peace Center even called it an excellent way to stay informed, avoid echo chambers, and expand your worldview. I'm always really impressed with Ground News.
You know that communist rag?
If you want to stay informed on U.S. politics and more, subscribe through this QR code or my link below at ground.news.
The C standing for Communist News Network.
Unlimited Access Vantage plan. It comes out to $5 a month for unlimited access to all the features I've mentioned. Thanks, Ground News. First, let me take a step back to quickly define fascism, because it is a term that has been thrown around a lot lately, I think for good reason, but people tend to dismiss it as just an epithet that doesn't mean anything anymore because we use it as a label for everything. And the reality is that fascism is hard to define. It doesn't fit into a box like other isms tend to do, and it is entirely dependent on the state in which it arises. Robert Paxton's book, The Anatomy of Fascism, helps to give us a kind of definition. Under Paxton's interpretation, fascism is a mass anti-liberal, anti-communist movement, radical in its willingness to employ force, where nationhood and membership in a dominant class is put above all else, and where national unity and distinction from a class of deplorable others is reinforced by the state. And by anti-liberal, he didn't mean liberals like we use the term in modern United States, like liberals versus conservatives. He meant the term like liberalism to mean liberal economics, the idea of unrestricted free trade, a la neoliberalism, or what some might call globalism today. So an anti-liberal, anti-communist, pro-nationalist movement that revolves around membership to a prescribed group, and anyone outside that group is seen as a threat, as others in need of elimination in one way or another. The unique thing about fascism is that it matters where it develops, because 1930s Germany was far more susceptible to the argument in favor of putting the nation above the individual, whereas 2020's United States, fascism is wielded by appealing to the rugged individualism that is so ingrained in US culture. But the pieces are all there. There's the tariffs to reinforce protectionism and bring back manufacturing and fight against globalization. There's the radical willingness to use force exhibited on January 6th, 2021, and perpetuated in our streets every day now by a growing Gestapo made up of untrained, militarized, masked men who kidnap people off the streets as our government cheers. And those people being taken, the immigrants, the others, seen as such a threat to the nation, to the sense of nationhood that they claim is being eroded by our open borders, are being constantly vilified and stereotyped in seemingly never-ending propaganda pumped out by the government. The pieces are all there. Robert Paxton himself, after January 6th, determined that Trump's regime can rightfully be called fascist, okay? So it's important to take a moment to acknowledge that it is not an overstatement to call Trump a fascist or his regime fascist. Leading scholars of fascism use the term to describe this regime. We are not being hyperbolic when we are saying that we are living under an increasingly fascist regime, okay? And it is true that historically, fascist regimes like Hitler's, like Mussolini's, placed a lot of emphasis on bodies, on the physical human form as a symbol of nationhood. Arno Brecker was...
Of course, because they were pushing eugenics. They were pushing this belief that certain genetics are superior, that it was not something that could be challenged, that it was simply fact. And of course that meant abled bodies over disabled. Of course that meant white over, black, brown, anything not white. Of course that meant thin over not thin. This idea that there are genetics, that there are there are bodies, there are beauty standards that are simply superior.
Hitler's favorite sculptor, and he helped create the mythology of the Aryan race in Nazi Germany. Perfectly proportioned, lean, muscular male figures and slender, athletic women. The agile, athletic body ideal was directly tied in Nazi propaganda with the strength and health of the nation, which was a really enticing image in a country that was struggling to regain its strength after World War I. The first president of the Weimar Republic in Germany between World War I and the rise of Hitler, Friedrich Ebert, was photographed in a bathing suit next to Defense Minister Gustav Noske, and the two were openly mocked for years afterwards because of how unfit they both looked. The public seeing this as a metaphor for the weak and flabby state of the government of Germany after the First World War. Of course, Hitler himself wasn't exactly the model of perfect athletic Aryan beauty, but we've all seen Trump and his golfing whites. That doesn't really seem to matter, as Robert
but you know what's so funny to me is how MAGA people will constantly AI generate photos of Trump with a six-pack. Like, put Trump into a Chad body, you know?
Paxton told the New York Times, quote, "Focusing on leaders," Paxton has long held, "is a distraction when trying to understand fascism. What you ought to be studying is the milieu out of which they grew," Paxton said. "For fascism to take root, there needs to be an opening in the political system, which is the loss of traction by the traditional parties," he said. "There needs to be a real breakdown. Fascist movements succeed," Paxton wrote, "in environments in which liberal democracy stood accused of producing divisions and decline." And that was true in post-World War I Germany, and it sure as hell is true today in the United States, where income inequality is at an all-time high, and people are going bankrupt just trying to pay for housing, food, education, childcare, and medical bills, you know, the basics to keep themselves alive. The MAGA movement has capitalized on this desperation and directed it into hatred for their chosen other, immigrants. And much like the current milieu in the United States is ripe for fascism, it's also ripe for the re-emergence of the heroin chic aesthetic. But the thesis that I would like to present to you today is that while I think it serves the fascist agenda, I think that this is merely a happy coincidence for the fascists.
Yeah, I mean, in simple terms, fascism is about an in-group and then an out-group. And also fascism is inherently an empty ideology. It is self-devouring, and it is one that emphasizes control. And so when talking about bodies, when talking about thinness, it is seen as a moral imperative to be thin, as it is dominance over the body. And it aligns, of course, with the Hitlerian, but even before Hitler, the European beauty standards that are associated with a thin body and with white skin.
And not the result of some vast fascist conspiracy. Because it turns out we've been policing.
It's also another way to distract people within the idea of something that they can control. Yes. And I get it, because see, and this is why, like, it's complex. It's complex because I understand that, look, there are plenty of people who are not radicalized to the right, who are not fascists, who view fitness, who view working out as a way, as a form of control. Will Neff, for instance. Will is a person who loves the gym. He loves to have his body feel strong. He loves to work on his body in that sense. And for him, it's a form of control, and a form of control that also keeps his mental illness at bay. So I'm not saying like everyone who has that kind of attitude towards fitness is like playing, is a fascist or playing in the hands of fascists. But when specifically looking at how fascism has been associated with control of bodies, and how there is a radicalization that's occurring where control of the body, extreme control, thinness being treated as an imperative, as a measure of worthiness, like that is happening, and that has historically happened. So different forms of control. Yes. And Will is not a person who Will is not a person who is being radicalized by somebody who is emphasizing how, oh, you can take control of your body and therefore your life. And also, I will take control of you because now you are, now you are like my disciple. And no, so yeah. So anyway, I know a lot of people utilize fitness for their mental health and mental wellness, and that's important. Like, I get that. So for the 10th time in having this discussion, I don't want y'all to think that I'm saying that if you go to the gym or if fitness is important to you, then you're a fascist or that you're being radicalized to fascism. But for others who do not have critical thinking skills, or whose critical thinking skills are being eroded and who are vulnerable towards radicalization, this is a pipeline. This can be a pipeline. Yeah. And examine your motivations. Yes. It would be really funny to pretend you think that so you can farm a clip. Yeah. You juxtapose that next to like Will or Hassan talking about fitness. And I'm over here like, if you go to the gym, you are a fascist. I'm like super woke. I, in fact, am the woker. I have so many examples of propaganda pieces from Nazi Germany that speak to this. It's such an overt theme, and it's central. Our fellow, our resident history grad, is central to the creation of the idea of Volk, people that excludes undesirables. There's also an interesting book on fascism and fashion for women in Nazi Germany, but I can't remember the name right now. Right. So when we talk about these things from history, it doesn't mean that it's applicable in every single situation. When we talk about the connection between fascism and fashion, it doesn't mean that if you care about fashion, that if you're into that, then you are playing into the hands of fascism, right? So it's not these total generalizations. You want to know how I got these striations?
And wait for a long, long time. And that policing serves not to uphold fascism, but instead to uphold the various ideologies that happen to serve fascism, like eugenics, the patriarchy, and neoliberalism. And listen, I can already picture the comments section. Some of you may think it's really not all that deep. In fact, I went unwillingly into the bowels of Reddit to understand some of this health-based body policing ideology, and I found myself in a subreddit called Fat Logic.
Oh, God. Oh, the things you do when you're making a video essay. That's because the idea of fitness isn't inherently fascist. Fascism having such tropes is because fascism in different ways always tries to separate people and achieve what's greatest for the inside group. And evolutionary and health-wise, we know being normal, fit, and healthy is what's good, so they turn this very thing into segregation and fascism. Yeah, and it is it's a separation between the concept of fitness and health, and then it being nefariously turned into these white supremacist ideals and standards, and how fascists, as you said, fascists separate, the whole point is to have an in-group and an out-group, and them dictating the standards for what is in the in-group, and utilizing, and now, when we're talking about the fitness to alt-right pipeline, the way that alt-right ideology has become more normalized within mainstream politics and within culture, And so how we're seeing we're seeing this pop up all over the place where a wellness influencer is suddenly promoting a traditionalism, and then that getting into being anti-vaccine, and just how that all spirals. Look at how RFK and Hegseth talk about obesity. Being fit is your patriotic duty. Yes. So the far right has made enormous strides in normalizing their ideology within our current political system and also within culture. So I think it's important to be not just talking about the history here per Nazi Germany, but looking at how this is manifesting today and how something that might not on the surface seem nefarious and with the potential to dangerously radicalize people, when you go below the surface and you recognize how when you recognize its historical roots, you can see what I'm talking about then. And it is worrisome how we are at a point in time that far right ideology has been normalized to this extent. And in order to in order to stop it and to stop people from falling down this path, you have to be able to identify it. You have to be able to recognize when and where and why it's occurring. The Do Ruddy column, thank you for the prime.
As far as I can tell, is a community of 35,000 weekly visitors who see themselves as healthy or aspiring to be healthy and promoting health, and feel that they are diametrically opposed to what they call FAs, or fat activists, who are engaged in, quote, lengthy diatribes about how everything is society's fault. According to the page's About section, quote, falling victim to fat logic means accepting misinformation that will harm efforts to keep your body at a healthy weight or lose weight if you need to do so. There is so much to unpack about this, but
it's the posts you see where it's this is what every man wants, and it's some maybe AI generated, probably AI generated, but it'll be a white woman with double D boobs, but super skinny with abs. And she's got a baby on her hip, a little, Aryan looking child, blonde hair, blue eyes, and then two other young children behind her. And she's wearing a bikini, or maybe she's wearing a little dress or whatever. Because they can't, which one is it? Is it that women showing skin is bad, or that women covered up is bad? I don't know. But it's shit like that, right? Where you see that, and that's, I think, a more obvious example. But what it is exactly what this white supremacist idealized version of a woman, of a family, of what our culture should look like. Real men want XYZ. Yeah. Yeah. And it's so funny too, because on the one hand, it's these pro-natalist freaks keep pushing, and the far right keeps pushing this idea, this belief that the birth rate is falling, that women need to do their duty and have children, and yet at the same time want women to be extremely thin. And it's do you understand that for a body of a woman to be able to carry and deliver a child, that doesn't go hand in hand with being unhealthily skinny? Do we get that? Caroline, I just landed man number 1 in Les Mis. Do you hear the people singing the songs of angry men? Congratulations. So exciting. That's fucking awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Noted some common objections that these health warriors had to so-called fat activists, equating thinness with fascism, because I have seen these same ideas swirling all over the place online, including in my own comment section. Those objections...
I'm pregnant for the first time and still not showing. Congratulations on being pregnant, but I hate to admit that I'm so concerned about getting bigger because I've been pretty thin my entire life. I don't know how to change my brain, unfortunately, and shift my mindset on respecting my body and growing a human. Yeah, that's because of this cultural and political bullshit that's being shoved down our throats, which is that, oh, you should have a baby, but also you should look like this. And then if you look like this, that's bad. And also if you don't immediately, as soon as you've given birth, like bounce back to creating 3 homemade meals a day and raising 100 children and doing all of this, you know, doing your domestic duties, then you're not a real woman and yada, yada, yada. And it's fucking bullshit. But also, this is, you know, this is what we're talking about, that it is these pressures that have always existed, but also are more prominent when we see a rise in fascism, in far right ideology inseminated into our culture. And anyway, just the most important thing, and you know this, the most important thing is that you take care of your body and the health of the child that you're growing. And you have to do what's good for the both of you. And that is what matters. And it will be, you know, I'm not going to say that's going to like take away the struggle that you are feeling. And I'm sorry that's something that you even have to consider through no fault of your own, as you are doing something as intensive as growing a child in you. It is so intense. Like pregnancy, the way that pregnancy changes a woman's body is still something that I think people are ashamed to talk about. They're not allowed to talk about. People don't care. They don't understand. Like, just how drastic of changes it can produce while you are pregnant, after you've given birth, a year after you've given birth. I mean, postpartum depression is still something that we lack a general understanding of. We lack the empathy for people who experience what is incredibly common to experience, and that is PPD. Anyway, I wish you good health. I wish you a safe pregnancy, and just take care of your body, you know. There's so many women who go into the process knowing nothing about it or what will happen to their bodies during and after, because it's never talked about. Yes, and these expectations of like what their pregnancy should be, what they should look like after they have, you know, after they give birth, what that child, you know, they should immediately connect with their child. They should immediately bounce back. Like, I have never been, I have never had a child. I have not had that experience. And yet I know these things to be true. Okay. Farley. Yes. Yes. Farley. Never forget about Farley. He is my baby. He'll always be my baby. Weirdest thing that happened to me after pregnancy is the nausea. I didn't have morning sickness, but after giving birth, Even thinking about a roller coaster makes me want to puke. Yeah. And sometimes people have morning sickness with one child and then another one they don't. I don't know. It's just the never ending expectations and pressures that just continue, and it's frustrating and it's maddening. And your pregnancy should be something that you shouldn't, you have so many other things that you have to think about and that are going on with your body. And it should not be, you shouldn't have to think about how you look. That shouldn't be something that anyone should have to consider.
Include that it's not that deep. Not everything has to be political. Though I feel like if you're watching my content, you probably already understand that nothing happens in a vacuum and everything is political if you just take a second to rub two brain cells together and think about it. That's not to say that everything is a conspiracy, but everything exists within society.
Did you see the story about the lady Mercedes who was wheeled out of the hospital to give birth on the side of the road?
Absolutely influenced by the society we exist in. To pretend otherwise is willfully ignorant. Okay? And then a lot of the other arguments that they had against the idea that thinness serves fascism, I think stems from this idea, which again, I've seen all over the internet, that there is a very strict binary here. Anyone who isn't preaching the gospel of maintaining a healthy weight is instead advocating for everyone to be so immobilized by their obesity that they can hardly get off the couch, which is also, I think...
Right, that's the point that I was making, that they just come in with the most bad faith arguments. Norks, what I would say to you too is like, try to focus instead that if you start showing more, if you don't start showing more, whatever it is, like the emphasis is that you have a healthy pregnancy. And I'm so sorry. I'm sorry that you're feeling that pressure and that, you get those comments, because those comments just reinforce the need to like not look pregnant when you're pregnant, which is absurd. And also, yes, your pre-pregnancy body may not be your new normal. I know there's a lot physically and mentally you're probably going through because you are growing a human in you, which is crazy, but it's also awesome. And you're gonna be okay. You're gonna be okay. You'll be okay. And if anybody says shit, you know what? You just snap at them. You are more than well within your right to be a fucking to be a bitch to people who are deserving it. If anybody says anything, you just snap at them. Permission to snap.
A willfully ignorant interpretation of the body positivity movement. Is there problematic behavior within the online body positivity movement as well? You bet your ass there is. But from my experience, consuming that content for literally a decade at this point, whether I wanted to or not, the general idea that is most often touted by people in the body positive community is that a person can be healthy while not fitting the stereotypical ideals of what a healthy body should look like. That the BMI scale doesn't actually dictate a person's lived experience in their own body, because some people can feel fine and have perfectly healthy test results and exist and function normally and still be considered obese on the BMI scale. That thin people who do fit the body ideal could be incredibly ill. That judging a person's worth based on the size of their body is problematic, and that there is discrimination that happens against fat people because our society has placed certain levels of worthiness onto people. That calories in versus calories out doesn't capture the whole picture of a person's weight and health. that things like poverty, childhood trauma, and mental health disorders and autoimmune disorders that are, especially in women, criminally understudied and misunderstood, play a huge role in someone's weight and someone's ability to lose weight or gain weight or maintain a healthy weight. At its best, the body positivity movement helps to complicate the conversations we have around weight and health, because it's not black and white, and we actually know very little relatively about nutrition and how the body works, despite all the advances in modern medicine that do exist. But for the people in the Fat Logic subreddit and in comment sections across the internet, having those conversations just glorifies being unhealthy and is nothing more than a misunderstanding of the clearly established basics of biology and physics. Okay, but instead of fully engaging in those arguments, I do actually want to take a step back, because this is a symptom of a larger issue that we should have a conversation about when we're talking about bodies and how they are policed in order to serve the ends of the government. Because what all of these conversations revolve around, whether within the Fat Logic subreddit or the body positivity movement or elsewhere, is this ideal of being quote unquote healthy. Not only that there is one singular ideal of what healthy looks like, but that it is assumed that all self-respecting people should strive for that singular ideal of health. And whether or not someone strives for health determines their worth on some level. This pervasive obsession with health, or even trying to convince people that health can exist at every size, kind of turns us into the proverbial fish that is so surrounded by water they don't even realize they're swimming in it. In trying to convince people that fat people can still be healthy, we are taking for granted what health is, and that it should be the ultimate end goal for everyone, and that someone's failure to at least attempt to be healthy is a deep moral failing. Once we step back and identify that assumption, now we can start having conversations around the politics of bodies. Instead of infighting in the comments section over whether or not Ariana Grande is healthy, let's discuss why we have placed so much moral emphasis on health to begin with, because that is its own social construct that has been orchestrated and promoted by individuals and governments for centuries. I'm, of course, not the first person to ever make this point. There's a great book called Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Dr. Sabrina Strings. So if I haven't convinced you that it is, in fact, that deep, please consider giving that book a read. It's really revelatory, because when we start examining how notions of health and what is the correct body to have shifted and changed throughout history, that's when we start to see how these notions perhaps are not orchestrated by fascism, but are certainly convenient for fascism to thrive. If we go back to the Renaissance, which was the 1300s.
Disabled are left out of this convo all the time. Yes, that is absolutely true. And it's something that I know. I know that I am not perfect at considering the obstacles, both visible and invisible, because it's just so pervasive that disabled people face. That gyms not being set up for the disabled, just a lot of examples of how, oh, did my microphone get louder? A lot of examples of how disabled people from the jump are excluded in our society. So a lot of times, like even in these conversations around these political and cultural issues, the absolute lack of consideration towards the disabled community.
Through the 1600s, the aesthetic of the Rubenesque woman was the European beauty standard. These women were stately, to say the least, often somewhat muscular thanks to the influence of Greek art on the Renaissance, but also full-figured. Some might say, God forbid, fat.
Yeah, fasting to make yourself closer to God.
But also fertility, especially where you have a societal system dominated by feudal lords and the peasants who serve them. Then came the transatlantic slave trade, the growth of the sugarcane trade that allowed for imports of larger and larger amounts of sugar into Europe, making it a lot more affordable and accessible to the everyday commoner. It was the increase in sugar consumption that helped precipitate a growing awareness of fatness and body mass, because, oh no, now the poors are getting fat. But it was the othering of enslaved Africans that helped precipitate the fear and dread of having a higher body fat percentage. The European fascination with the wild, uncivilized black body is best exemplified in the story of the South African woman named Sarah Baartman, who was put on display as a kind of freak show.
Sandwich Slayer. Did you pre-watch?
In the early 1800s. People from all across Europe would come to gawk at her because she was allegedly double-cheeked up, and the Europeans saw it as a sort of living natural history museum. Not a human, but simply a freakish example of the exoticism of the African continent. She died at the age of 26 in 1815, and afterwards her remains, including her brain, genitalia, skeleton, and a body cast, were put on display in various museums. Her skeleton and body cast were displayed facing away from the viewer to emphasize continued interest in her exotic proportions, and remained on display until the mid-1970s. Her remains were eventually repatriated to her homeland in South Africa and officially buried in August 2002. Like, history is not that distant from us, you know? The point is that it was around this time, the late 1700s, early 1800s, and beyond, when the transatlantic slave trade was at its peak, when Europeans were being indoctrinated with the savagery of the Africans, that body policing away from full-figured women and towards a thin ideal began to first take shape. Victorians were real weird about labeling and categorizing everything, and a lot of pseudoscience sprung up to attempt to reinforce the differences between Europeans and Africans, to try to create categories of people based on physical differences that in turn represented something inherent in the person with that physical difference. In time, the accumulation of body fat was equated with the out of control and barbaric black race, and it was the duty of the European woman to get as far away from that body type as possible. To be thin, to control one's intake, was a sign of refinement, of racial superiority, of godly self-control that no African could ever possess. Body policing coincided with the invention of races as a means of justifying continued enslavement of human beings. It's fine because they are different and worth less than us Europeans, and attempting to reinforce the supremacy of Europe and of the white race over others. This is, of course, also when eugenics was invented, to give an official air to the racism through the creation of pseudoscience that sounded legitimate but was based on nothing. That's also when the body mass index, bullshit, or BMI scale, was invented. Remember how those Victorians
this video,
making shit up? Yeah, this was one of those instances. In fact, the BMI scale was heavily relied upon by Francis Galton, one of the primary developers of eugenics. It was originally created by a man named Adolf Quetelet, who was on a mission to determine the social ideal of the average man. His index was never meant to be used as a medical test, but instead was simply a measure of the ideal, average, normal distribution of weights of men in 1835, and not even men generally. His data was taken from Scottish Highland soldiers and French soldiers, all male.
Yeah, and here's the thing. When you control everything from medical sciences to the government to just everything in society, you get to do that. You get to make shit up to promote your self as the, and those who look like you as the superior beings. When you're in control, you get to set the terms and be like, well, it's actually science, but it's science that we made up because we're in control of what science gets pushed out there. Love this convo, but I have to work in the morning. Have a good day at work.
As is still the case for
when you set the system up, you get to just bullshit as much as you want to make sure that you stay in power.
Medical studies, a metric designed for European men. The term BMI was coined by Ansel Keys in 1972 in a paper in which Keys also noted that the BMI was not fully satisfactory, but was, quote, as good as any other relative weight index as an indicator of relative obesity. Not of health, of relative obesity. He also noted that the BMI scale was a useful tool for population studies, but not appropriate to be used for individual evaluations. So for studying population trends and data, BMI numbers may prove useful, but for evaluating the health of an individual, it is not a particularly useful tool. But because it's so simple and has been repeatedly published since it was originally created, it's been adopted as a tool to judge individuals based on their weight as compared to the average Scottish or French soldier in 1835. Okay, but that's kind of an aside. The point is that the popular notion that thin is preferable has origins in the transatlantic transatlantic slave trade, fear of being associated with blackness, and religious ideals of piety and self-control, also as a means of differentiating and distancing oneself from blackness and poverty.
I'm closer to God because I've only consumed 3 almonds. That makes me very holy. I ate simply just 1 cracker, and that has made me morally righteous.
For Afropunk, Leslie Vargas writes, over time, thinness has transcended race, becoming a symbol of wealth and privilege across communities.
As a cracker who only ate 1 cracker, it means I am better than you.
For Black women, thinness now operates as a form of social capital, a means to navigate a world that polices Black bodies with even greater scrutiny. In spaces where thinness is equated with success,
Quaker.
health, and desirability, Black women are pressured to conform to these standards, further erasing the rich diversity of body types within Black communities. And thinness definitely plays a role, but I would argue that it's actually health that has become the status symbol, the commodity of the rich. Women can be trailer trash and also skinny, for example, but it is health that is put on this pedestal because it is so unattainable for the average person who has high cortisol from the stress of working and trying to pay for rent and healthcare and everything else that's expensive but necessary for living. Someone who doesn't have time to go to the gym or meal prep or have the energy to eat 3 balanced, high protein, high fiber meals every day. The moneyed class with leisure is the only class capable of truly attaining health at the level that society has deemed is correct. This is not a product of fascism or being caused by the rise of fascism. This has been an issue since before Trump got elected. Heroin chic existed in the 90s under a Democratic president. Our boomer...
Nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. The damage that did to a generation of young girls, myself included. My God, you could not fucking escape that. Could not escape. Nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. Oh my God. We're still not free from that. We are still not free from that. What is that? Okay. So that is a quote from Kate Moss that was said in the 2000s, and then later she said that she did regret it. She was like, yeah, I don't want to be associated with that anymore because I regret saying that. She said that her friend used to say it. She said that her friend who she used to live with would always say nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. And I have many counters to that. Okay. Mac and cheese, dumplings, pizza, chips. Really, so many examples. So many examples that tastes a lot better than skinny feels, because I feel when you have that mentality, there's probably never a skinny enough. You know, if you are operating under a nothing tastes as good as skinny feels, you probably have a very unhealthy relationship with your body and with food, and probably look in the mirror and still see weight to be lost. And you know what one of the great joys in life is? Sharing a meal with someone else. Sharing a meal, talking for hours. It's one of the great joys in life. You know what tastes better than skinny feels? 3 crackers. Wasn't she also doing a shitload of coke? Yes. I mean, Kate Moss exemplified the term heroin chic. So picture the rail thin frame, kind of stringy hair, like a little tank top, cigarette, looks like you've been on a coke bender for a week, eyeliner, rim of eyeliner, black eyeliner. Yeah, it's the cigs and stimulants diet. Is she still alive? Yeah, and her daughter's a model.
Her parents are almond moms with fucked up relationships with food and their bodies because beauty standards in the 50s and 60s were so specific that weighing 10 to 15 pounds more or less than you should would lead to ridicule and public shaming. That our fascist overlords can get away with more because we're all starving ourselves into oblivion is merely a happy coincidence of years of conditioning us to police each other over health. That RFK Jr. was able to capitalize on years of crunchy granola liberals falling down the Maha pipeline into anti-vax land, where health has been twisted and contorted to fit an anti-science worldview, one that is based partially on well-founded fears that our world is full of contaminants from major corporations that don't care about our health, and partially on conspiracy theories and pseudoscience. It's not a plan formulated by the Trump regime, but instead the Trump regime thriving where body and health policing has already taken hold. This racism, this patriarchy telling us to stay small and quiet, this was all already within us. Fascism just stepped in and said, how can I exploit this? So while I do love to blame the fascists for the ills currently being inflicted upon this country, this one can be blamed on something else, something that implanted itself in America long before today's fascist takeover. Say it with me, neoliberalism. Okay, stick with me here. Mid-century America saw post-war prosperity and a blossoming middle class.
Two things about Leeja Miller, if you're new to Leeja Miller. Hates neoliberalism, hates Ronald Reagan.
Class. That, combined with free market neoliberalism to emphasize the individual, the entrepreneur, the bootstrapper, the American
either or
dream,
both.
The self-reliant individual who relies on their own dedication and hard work, letting the state off the hook for providing much of anything. That was put on steroids thanks to, say it with me, Ronald fucking Reagan, who brought rugged cowboy individualism to the White House and sold America on the lie of trickle-down economics, deregulating industries from sea to shining sea, leading to the monopolistic, deregulated hellscape that has catapulted the wealth of the 1% into the stratosphere while leaving the rest of us with stagnant wages, a predatory health insurance industry, and a depleted housing market. Thanks to that deregulation and the rampant capitalism of the last century, we are now sicker than we've ever been, and we can't trust businesses or our government to do anything about it. But thanks to that rugged individualism, it's actually all our fault as individuals if we can't muscle through, literally, the impossible societal odds and just be healthy. Much like MAGA today and Reagan last century taught us to fear the welfare queens and the immigrants mooching off the system, anyone who is unhealthy because of anything that might be attributable to lifestyle choices is simply mooching off the system because of their own ignorance, stupidity, and laziness. And listen, let me acknowledge, there is definitely personal agency when it comes to your individual health. Moving your body more and eating vegetables is a conscious choice that some people can make, but it is the oversimplification of being healthy. It is ableist as fuck to decide that everyone can just choose health, and the self-righteousness with which healthy people speak about unhealthy people, the moral judgment placed on people who are unhealthy, and assuming that body weight is the best test of someone's worthiness for empathy, that shit is toxic, and it mirrors the thinking and worldview of fascists. It helps to normalize seeing certain people as more worthy than others, as worth more than others. And that is the central tenet of fascism. That is what leads to people getting kidnapped off the streets into unmarked vans because they speak Spanish or maybe don't have their documents in order, which is not a criminal offense, by the way. But we are able to look the other way because we are more worthy. We were born here. We aren't criminals. We're more human than they are. And the capital.
Yeah, and it also just continuously feeds the notion that the way to succeed is you just got to be above the other guy. You know, it's the individualism that she was talking about, the rugged individualism, but it's this persistence that is a result from those in power who want us to fight amongst ourselves and to view each other as the enemy and to be like, look, as long as you're one step above that guy, then then great. No need to turn towards those at the top and be like, hey, maybe the problem is here. It's the way that like they pitted rich whites pitted poor whites against poor blacks. And we're like, hey, we're not the problem here. It's those poor black people over there. And that's who you should be not only seeing as your enemy, but seeking to maintain a place above. Even though we're way above all of y'all, don't worry about that. Heaven forbid the poor's ever band together. And that's what they're scared of.
Lists and the billionaires and major corporate shareholders benefit no matter what, no matter who's in office, because this creates impossible standards that we are all...
Wait. We were getting ready for the Night Rain DLC, finding out Fergie did Quando. Shut the fuck up. We might have to look at that after.
Casing that we are willing to spend hundreds and thousands of dollars to attempt to attain. And all they have to do is tap into that desire and promise us a cure. So that when Ozempic, the miracle weight loss drug, comes onto the market, promising to fix all our ailments, to give us the thinness we so deeply desire so that we can finally prove our worth, well, the perfect storm is already there. And the drug manufacturers are simply cashing in. And it is us, online, in the comment sections, in our communities, doing the policing work that benefits the fascists and the capitalists by commenting endlessly on whether or not people are living up to the healthy ideals that they are morally supposed to live up to, including Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo and Michelle Yeoh, who have gone too far. And I'm not sure they're healthy. And therefore, they are worthy of criticism, which lets everyone in society watching the conversation unfold puts them on notice that if they too step out of line of the...
Okay, I do push back on her on this for the reasons that I stated previously, which I'm not going to fully repeat again. But one being that I do think it is a difference. There is a difference when somebody is in an influential position, and particularly influential on hordes of young people, hordes of young girls. So there's that element. And then there's just the overall conversation on how, which is what she's talked about too, though, that thinness and extreme thinness is upheld despite modern body positivity movements, and in industries like Hollywood, where women, these are women who are of a celebrity status, who have a lot of eyes on them, who in turn have a lot of influence, that they are consistently under pressure and demonstrating a tendency to like just keep being really fucking thin. And what that reinforces then culturally and socially, and how it feels like we can't escape that. It feels like what I was raised seeing and believing to be something that I needed to do when I was young is what I worry hasn't gone away for like young kids now. Ariana Grande is a massive pop star. She has millions of young female fans who are vulnerable, who are susceptible to being influenced towards thinking like that's what they should look like. That's what they need to look like.
Ideals of health in either direction, this mob of criticism will come for them too. All this does is help the capitalists accumulate more wealth. Oops. So sorry. Every video lately has turned into a Marxist criticism, but yeah, here we are. Your obsession with policing the health of everyone around you only reinforces the narrative that individuals are solely to blame if they fall outside the confines of what you think is healthy. And in fact, what you think is healthy has been dictated mostly by centuries of men just...
And the other thing I would say is, yes, Ariana Grande, Cynthia Erivo, Michelle Yeoh, they're individuals, but because of the position they're in society, they're like because of the industry that they're in and just the nature of their being famous, how do I describe this? It's like, what would be the way to, like like what they represent, and how it's like the problems that we're talking about really amplified when we're talking about these famous women. I don't know if that makes sense. Where she's kind of treating them like they're just random everyday people when that's not the case. And there is a distinction. There is a distinction when you are somebody who's in an industry that is that's so aesthetics obsessed and so forward facing and like gets a lot of attention, and people pay a lot of attention to.
Shit up, usually influenced by the patriarchy or racism or both. And therefore, it is up to individuals to force themselves to conform to these body standards. And if they can't manage to do that, then they are bad and lazy, because the end goal isn't really health. Because if these people policing other people's bodies genuinely cared about their health, that would require a level of empathy that people seem incapable of extending to those who have been othered, those seen as morally reprehensible because they aren't healthy. And it abdicates the state's responsibility to provide for its people the basics necessary to sustain life, which is what I think the state ought to be responsible for. But for capitalists, the primary usefulness of the state lies in its ability to protect property and nothing else. So by assigning blame to individuals and letting the state off the hook, you are playing into the hands of the 1% who say, yes, good, shrink.
Yes, and this is true. My disagreement is with her kind of roping in the discourse around the Wicked 2 actresses into this conversation.
So that I can continue to exploit people's labor and pay no taxes while everyone who works for me remains just sick enough to be too tired to organize against me, but with just enough access to modern medicine to remain alive, to continue to labor for me because they have to, because otherwise they will have no health insurance and no home. And oops, here we are, back where every single episode has ended lately, and that is class struggle. Hello, a person can be perfectly healthy and also technically obese based on their BMI. Whether or not a person is healthy does not and should not determine their worthiness for empathy and respect. You can be the epitome of health and die of a heart attack tomorrow. You can struggle to maintain your health through no fault of your own. There are so many huge industries that depend on keeping us unhealthy in order to make their money that the odds are frankly stacked against us. You actually can't tell a person's health by just looking at them. That's literally why we have doctors and scanners and blood tests and urine tests and DEXA scans and all the other shit we rely on.
And can I be frank also? Can I be frank? Yes, I agree. But let's not kid ourselves. Let's not like act as if the most likely scenario here is that these actresses are perfectly healthy and we can't tell because, you can't tell someone's health by looking at them and blah, blah, blah. I know. Let me be frank. Hi, everybody. I'm Frank. Like, let's just keep it a fucking buck. Okay. Let's just be real about this shit. This is Hollywood. This is Hollywood. These are actresses in Hollywood, actresses who were already thin to begin with, who have gotten noticeably thinner. This is Hollywood. When I tell you the immense pressure that is on women, the immense pressure throughout the history of Hollywood, this being one of the most superficial industries that there is. Unfortunately, because you wish it was just about great art, but it is an industry that has ridden on superficialities. So let's not play pretend. Let's not sit here and like with all the considerations, not acknowledge that we've seen this again and again. There are many such cases of actresses, whether they are on the set of Wicked 2, on the set of Ally McBeal, or whatever, who have eating disorders, who like are in competition with one another on a set to be the thinnest person, that all of the pressures and the standards and all the bullshit in Hollywood is just, it only reinforces this constant need to be as thin as a whistle. And women who like, yes, who have documented histories, who like, people will go, oh, well, she's always been thin. Okay, well, now it's like noticeably even thinner, which when you are a thin person to begin with, that gets into concerning territory. That's not the like the reasoning that you think it is. And yeah, anyway, so I am with all the thoughtfulness that I have tried to apply to this conversation and all the nuance and yada, yada, yada. I have to be, I gotta be so fucking real here. I think people are bullshitting themselves, trying to act like this is not, that this is most likely not worthy of, that this is not worthy of the concerns that people have, you know? Like, I was told at an audition for the show Insecure that I'm a big girl. That's Hollywood. For a show called Insecure, when I walked into audition and the casting director said, "Woo, you're a big girl." Yeah, baby. That's Hollywood. I mean, seriously, the like, how many instances do you see of actresses who start off at like, you know, a normal weight? Like they're already, you know, they're already smaller to begin with, and then they start becoming more famous in the industry. They start blowing up, and then suddenly they're like so scarily thin because they enter the machine, and then the pressures only are tenfold. Like, come on, you know, this is not hard to understand. I'm sorry, but anybody who's had an experience with an eating disorder or knows people who have struggled with an eating disorder, they know the signs. They know when they see posts of like where you on Ariana's Tumblr where she's showing off her waist and she's showing her fridge that only has vegetables in it, or it's like showing off her bones. And it is a form of control, and it is like yeah, this is the kind of stuff that like pictures of this will be in pro Anna communities. It'll be on like Tumblr and Reddit and Twitter, and they'll look at that and be like, inspo. I printed out this picture and put it up on my wall to remind me not to eat dinner. Like this. So that's why that even if in the instance that nothing was happening on the set, that all these already thin actresses just happen to get thinner, that everything is fine, even in that instance, it's still the influence that it's having. And it's still the way that women and girls, but especially girls, where it's like they're young and susceptible and vulnerable and their bodies are developing, like they will look at this and take it as inspiration. And that's something that's worthy of an important of having a conversation itself.
Doctors can try to see what's actually happening in our bodies, because turns out it's really complex. And while we all fight each other over whether or not we're healthy enough to deserve empathy or food stamps, meanwhile, Elon Musk has made $10 million in the time it's taken you to watch this video. You may think it's not that deep, but it so fucking is, okay? So what do we do about this? I would challenge you to decenter capitalism from your life as much as possible. That's kind of a major fix for a lot of the ills of society. Can you borrow the thing instead of buying it? Can you make do with what you already have? Do you actually need the thing to begin with? When it comes to your body and the impossible standards being set around what is and is not the perfect health that you're supposed to be, that is being capitalized on by various industries to try to sell you shit, whether it's protein powders or greens powders or at-home workout equipment.
The concept of thigh gaps being discussed in elementary school.
Or protein bars or special weight loss programs or weight loss drugs or an at-home infrared sauna from Costco. Like, we are inundated with shit all fucking day because it's our responsibility to make ourselves healthy. And if we don't, then we're bad people. So we're willing to impulse buy shit to try to make it happen. Speaking from experience, a lot of the fat phobia that has been ingrained in us,
we also had Tumblr
to self-police, to shame ourselves, and it doesn't work. If shame worked, every fat person would be skinny as hell, okay? Because the society provides enough shame to go around, and yet we have an incredibly unhealthy population. So a major step is also trying to contend with the preconceived notions you have about your own worth inside your own head. Food deserts, childhood trauma, stress, anxiety, expectations of productivity from 9 a.m. to 5
Yeah, I agree, concussed.
p.m.
I agree.
every day. None of this is conducive to being healthy. The food industry spends billions of dollars every year on food science that is literally specially formulated to fuck with your lizard brain so that you cannot stop eating even when you want to. The system is specially formulated to make you ill and then make you feel bad for being ill. And the standards of health that we are all being held to were largely made up and based off of centuries of misogyny, eugenics, and racism. That is so much to contend with. It's okay if your relationship with your health and your body varies from day to day. It's okay if you can't overcome the entire system while you're actively being oppressed by it. Health looks different for different people. You are not a moral failure if you don't live up to the made-up health standards, and you deserve to feel good about yourself no matter what you look like. You do not owe anyone your health. You also deserve to have the tools to have agency over your own health, and that is not easy to attain the way the world is currently set up, and that fucking sucks. But you also do have some agency. This is a yes and situation. We can acknowledge the societal hurdles and bullshit and also work towards feeling better in our bodies if we do not feel healthy. Whether or not you choose to do so does not make you morally superior or inferior. However, I personally have worked through my relationship with my body with a therapist and some EMDR sessions, which is a privilege not many people have access to, but if you do, I highly recommend unpacking the self-loathing, perfectionism, and self-policing that comes with especially being a woman in this fucking cesspool. I have found spite to be an incredibly motivating factor when it comes to my health.
Picture of a snail,
like,
thank you for the 29 months.
But learning about how the BMI scale was just invented by some dude and was never meant to be an individual indicator of anything, learning about how racism and sexism shapes how society places worth on individuals based on body type, learning about how white nationalism benefits from enforcing gender norms wherein women should be small but not so small because we have to be healthy because we must bear the Aryan children. All of that I find really inspiring to never have children and instead spend my life figuring out how to be able to deadlift a small vehicle. You know what I mean? I also have hypermobility and experience joint pain no matter what my weight is. So I'm on a mission to figure out how much muscle it takes to no longer experience joint pain, which may not be within my control, but also makes me acutely aware of the aging process and concerned with having mobility well into my old age. So I try to extend myself empathy while also maintaining a sense of hope and agency over what I can control and my own wellness, and over feeling good in my body while maintaining realistic expectations and not buying into the unrealistic standards for health or thinness. And
I think the other defense for these celebs is that they're victims of these eating disorders and of this culture, but they're sitting at the top of cultural standards as well. Yes, I think that's what I was kind of trying to say earlier, where I'm like, they have a lot of influence and they are in a position more than like your average person, even though they're adhering to, you know, of course they're adhering and have the pressures of beauty standards on them, but that they are perpetuating it as well. And nobody is here to shame somebody who has an eating disorder But also we're not going to stand by and act like body positivity means we can't talk about the prevalence of eating disorders in our society.
That's a lot to juggle, and I often really struggle with all of that. But doing that work inside of yourself means that you will also be less likely to extend that judgment to other people who are likely dealing with things that are not apparent just by looking at them. And once again, we come back to empathy and community as an antidote to the fascist hellhole that is currently engulfed this stupid country. Become ungovernable by showing empathy to yourself and your neighbors. Because that's radical. Also, feel free to drop in the comments all the reasons why you don't agree with me, because this subject really gets people riled up, and I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say. And if you'd like to support my work, consider joining here on YouTube by clicking the big join button below, or supporting me over on Patreon, patreon.com/Leeja Miller, where you get access to all these episodes completely ad-free. Thank you to my multi-platinum patrons, Mark, Sarah Shelby, Art, David, Latranger Lucas, Thomas Johnson, and Tay. Your generosity makes this channel what it is, so thank you. And if you liked this episode, you'll like the one from last week about why rich people are obsessed with Saudi Arabia. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Just to kind of conclude, I saw that Ariana reposted something she had said, I think last year. And she's like, just a reminder, don't talk about people's bodies. And of course, now that's being picked up by the stands and by people on a place like Twitter who, trying to turn this into a policing women's bodies type of thing. And I don't know, some accounts I follow who otherwise I think are great on issues like just the abuses that women face, the various like celebrity, like some accounts I follow who I started following because of like Blake Lively and Amber Heard and all that. They've posted about everyone shutting up about women's bodies, and I'm just sitting here like, and I feel that I'm a person who I have demonstrated enough with who I am and how I approach topics that I hope if you had that attitude, if you kind of looked at this situation in the way of, oh, this is people just being misogynistic and policing women's bodies. I hope you heard me out. I hope you stuck around for this. I would hope that like I have demonstrated I'm somebody who can have a conversation like this and am not just resorting to shaming women and policing women's bodies and being misogynistic. I'm being honest when I say my first instinct when I saw pictures of the actresses on Wicked, my first instinct was this looks like competitive eating disorders. This looks like something that is a cause for concern.